If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Cops and other law enforcement people, what were some cases you worked on that made you think, even if for a moment, that something supernatural/paranormal was going on? Was driving along and found a girl just standing in the middle of the road. My initial thoughts was to tell her to pay attention, but it was clear that while the lights were on, nobody was home. During my whole time with her, she never uttered a word. I was left in a weird situation. She had done nothing, clearly needed help, but medically nothing seemed wrong. As I am pondering what on earth I should do, the girl suddenly starts spinning. Now spinning is not illegal, and I'm starting to think this girl is one of those protesters that wind up police. I've dealt with Troll Station before, so I think crack on, spin to your heart's content. Then she loses her balance and falls, whacking her head on the side of the police car. Great. So I call an ambulance, but she seems fine. Still not talking, but she is looking up at the sky. It's a nice day, so fine, enjoy the sun. I do some writing and look back at her now bright red face and watering eyes and realize she is trying to damage her retinas by forcing herself to look directly at the sun. That's a new one on me, so now I'm holding a book or something above her to shield her eyes. Ambulance arrives and we get to hospital, and now she has forgotten how to walk. Now I'm 99% sure she is a wind-up merchant, but I get her a wheelchair. In the wheelchair she strikes up I'm a little teapot pose and keeps this up for the next hour, zero movement, just frozen with her arms out. So I now have 3 potential situations. 1. She is pretending to be frozen in time. 2. She is suffering from a mental health issue. 3. She has been possessed. By now I'm convinced it's the latter, but I section her and leave her with professionals. A week later I call the hospital and they tell me she is still frozen. My brother is a deputy, and at the time I worked as an EMT for a few small towns in northeast Colorado. I frequently went on ride along with him while waiting for 911 calls to come in. This took place in Amherst, Colorado. The town is very small. Amherst has about 50 people, a church, some houses, a grain tower, and a park. It was about 3 a.m. and we were about to call it a night. As we were making our last check on Amherst, we noticed movement at the park but couldn't tell exactly what was going on because it was pitch black. We drove up and stopped alongside the dirt road, flipped on the spotlight, and as we moved the light around the park, it finally settled on the back of a young girl, maybe 13, sitting on a swing with her back facing us. We left the spotlight on her. She wasn't moving, she just sat there facing away from us, looking down at the ground. Needless to say, it was a very creepy situation. We both looked at each other with that face you would make when something is out of the ordinary. I quickly suggested that we should call her over using the PA system. He agreed. As we looked back over, she was gone. I mean, no signs of anyone anywhere. The park was in a wide open area. She couldn't have gotten out of sight in the amount of time that we had our exchange of words. I remember saying, should we get out and look for her? Maybe she hid behind one of the park toys or something. My brother just looked at me and said hell to the no and drove away. It still creeps me out to this day. Years ago my uncle told us about a woman who would call the police station just about every night claiming that fairies or elves were breaking into her house and stealing her food. As is custom, every time she calls, they send a unit to check on her. My uncle gets it about 2 to 3 times per week. Every night they stop by her house and reassure her that no one has broken in and calm her down. One night when he gets to the house, she has poured powdered sugar all over the floor to record their tracks, and my uncle says he literally has to do a double take. All over the floor of her kitchen are these little tracks, tiny like nothing he's seen before. His partner starts taking photos and trying to figure it out. A few other officers come in, as most of them had gotten the call to her house too and want to see it. 10 police officers, all completely baffled as to what these weird little prints are. Turns out a possum had babies and they were sneaking into her kitchen for warmth or food. The prints look so foreign because most of the time baby possums are carried by their mother, not running around. 7 are rounded up and released in a less residential area. Police officer working the desk 1500 to 2300, fire alarm signal goes off. Many years ago the police department offered alarm monitoring service, still had 10 to 12 places that were hardwired, and it would require pulling apart a lot of equipment to disconnect the system, so we just kept it going. First shift dispatch is already punched in, so she took it. I'm headed out the door to the fire department when 911 rings from the same address. I answer it. No one in the other end, assumed they barely got to call before passing out. I bolt out the back door, hop in a squad car, radio in the 911 call on channel 3 that both police/fire can hear, and that I'm going directly to the house. Arrive just as another unit shows up. No signs of smoke, no sign of anything. Older woman comes walking up the street pushing a wheelchair with an elderly lady, her mother. They live there and just went out for an early evening stroll before dinner. Tell them what we have going on. Nobody else lives there, and as far as the elderly lady can remember, the alarm was disconnected from the house years ago during some renovations. They don't have any alarm system either, just a couple of smoke/fire detectors. We do a walk around the house, get to the back door off the kitchen, and you can clearly see and smell gas. We turned off the gas at the main, set up some fans to air it out, and find a cracked gas line going to the oven. Daughter said she spilled some coffee she was making for their walk and had to move the oven a few inches to clean, probably broke the line pushing the oven back in. Nothing else in the house is disturbed and both phones are on the hook. Fire chief shows up about 15 minutes into the call. He goes over to the two ladies and gives them both a hug. He's nearly in tears. The elderly lady in the wheelchair, her husband was the fire chief 60+ years ago for our department. The daughter, her husband passed away a few years ago, he was also a member of our department. Never believed in ghosts or spirits, but that call made me think maybe people who spend their lives doing good are allowed by some power to look over their loved ones every so often. Crazy old woman called because she heard someone repeatedly banging on her front door and garage door. It's after midnight and I get there, and the house is in the middle of the woods with nothing around for miles. I talk to the lady and she insists I check her large shed out back. So I open the shed door and peek in with my flashlight, and the entire shed is filled with creepy large homemade dolls. They're each probably like 2 to 3 feet tall and sitting upright facing the door. The hair on my neck went up for a minute. I didn't truly believe that something supernatural was going on, but dolls are just really creepy. He went to a call where a father had gone crazy and decided to shoot his family. He killed his wife and was looking around trying to find his 5-year-old son to shoot him. The boy had run outside and was trying to hide on the side of the house behind the trash cans. The father eventually found him and point blank emptied nearly a full magazine at the boy. When my dad arrived, they found the boy in shock, hiding right where his dad found him, not a wound on his body. There were bullet holes in the side of the house all around the boy. When they finally got to question him about it, they asked him what happened when his dad found him on the side of the yard. The boy replied, "The angel was in front of me with a shield, and he saved me. He pushed the gun away from me." I'm a second-generation firefighter. My father spent the latter days of his career as a fire safety director at a massive mental asylum. Our state version of OSHA has to come and do inspections at all facilities. His was no exception, so the OSHA inspectors make their way to an abandoned part of the facility that used to house the criminally insane. The absolute worst of the worst. Serial killers, rapists, cannibals, etc. My father left them with keys and a flashlight because the electricity didn't work. The inspectors were radioing back to my father that they kept hearing talking and footsteps, which was impossible. Not even squatters could move around because each section is isolated with locked doors to prevent escape. Eventually, the inspectors give up and actually flee without finishing. My dad decides to stick around and check the alarm boxes. They didn't. As he is checking one of the alarms, he feels as if someone is watching him from down the hall. As he looks, a shadow forms with a head, shoulders, torso but no legs, and just 2 holes where there should be eyes. My dad noped the hell on out of there. Since the hospital has shut down, it has been on Ghost Adventures, Ghost Hunters, and a myriad of other shows and movies. My dad has been in some of them. Jason from Ghost Hunters called it the scariest place he's ever investigated. Fire/EMS here. This is not my story, it happened on a different shift, but captain working overtime with us one day told it to us, and it creeped me out. The captain was on the first due engine company that was dispatched to a residential fire alarm in the middle of the night. Our dispatch protocols require us to send the first due unit emergency to a fire alarm, while the second due engine and ladder company respond routine. We go to tons of fire alarms and 99% of the time they are caused by a faulty system or burnt food, so we usually don't get too worked up over them. Anyways, as they approach the neighborhood they see the orange glow in the distance, and when they get on scene they find a 4,000 square foot house with heavy fire showing on the rear and that had already broken through the roof. The call was then upgraded to a working structure fire and more units were dispatched to assist. The captain of the first due stayed on the outside the whole time. He was incident commander until the 1st Battalion chief arrived on scene and took over, and then he assumed the safety role. So, he's on the outside, in radio contact with crews that are inside fighting the fire. After the bulk of the fire had been extinguished and as operations were winding down, the captain sees smoke inside a second-story window and asks crews inside to go inside the room on the BC corner to make sure the fire hadn't spread to the other side of the house. The crew search for a few minutes and radio back, "There's no room there, sir." The captain is a bit confused, as he is staring at what is clearly a window that is attached to a room of some sort. He relays detailed instructions of where the room should be to the crews inside, and they again advise that they can't find anything. Incredulous, the captain asks the incident commander for permission to go inside of the structure so he can show the interior crews exactly where the room in question is. His request is granted, and he goes inside, walks up the staircase, and walks towards the corner in question. There's no room there. Just a hallway with a corner. No doorway, no window, no room. Knowing that there has to be something behind the wall, they breach the drywall and crawl through to find a child's bedroom. The bedroom had a dresser, a desk, and a perfectly made bed that looked as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. For whatever reason, the owners of the home decided to wall off the bedroom and leave it just as it was, untouched and inaccessible. The captain said it was one of the strangest and eeriest things he had seen in a while. Cop here. Partner and I were dispatched to a welfare check. Elderly guy, nobody had seen him in a few days, mail overflowing in mailbox, missed a doctor's appointment, car hasn't moved, etc. We both know we are about to find a body. We arrive on scene and can't get anyone to the door, look through the window and sure enough, we can see his foot on the floor in the living room. My partner is a corporal and pulls rank and makes me go first. Door is unlocked and as soon as we open it we smell a mostly fresh dead body. Almost relieved, we both enter and he tells me to check vitals on dead dude. He is obviously dead, with lividity, dried feces on him and dried saliva around his mouth. So I go to stand over him and see if I can get a pulse, at which point he takes a deep breath, rolls over, and asks why we are in his house. At this point we both start screaming oh shits and what the fucks as we both run out of the house. We called EMS and they transported him. Said they couldn't get a blood pressure or pulse on him. I think he died a week later in the hospital. I still get jokes about raising the dead. Where I grew up there is an abandoned factory that high school and college kids will visit, usually around Halloween, because it's scary enough in the dark. It also houses a decent amount of homeless people. So once every few months the cops will come in, do a sweep, and force anyone there to leave. One night my uncle is working and there's a call to the non-emergency line saying there's a lot of movement at the building, that the caller can see light on every floor but the first. My uncle and a few other officers respond. No more than 10 minutes have gone by when my uncle gets there. There's no one around, but there's plenty of light pouring out of the openings where the windows once were. The officers all agree it looks more like fire than flashlights, so they call the fire department as a precaution. They walk into the first floor and start searching for the stairs. They find them and ascend to the second floor. There's no light anywhere. Same with the third, fourth, fifth floors. They sweep the entire building, every nook and cranny, even the roof. There's no light source and no one there that they can find. Fire had arrived shortly after they went in and they couldn't see anything from the outside other than the subtle glow of flashlights, which was faint. Nothing like what my uncle and the others had seen. But my uncle said that what was even more unsettling was that none of the homeless areas, which were usually comprised of piles of trash along with cardboard boxes and blankets, were there. Not that they didn't find any homeless people, but that there was no sign that anyone had been in there at all, ever. I was dispatched around 3 a.m. to attend a house where the caller was concerned that someone had broken into the basement and was still inside. The caller was a very old lady and she lived alone. As far as she could tell, she woke up and noticed that the basement lights were on, and she hadn't been downstairs in years. My partner and I get to the call and the lady is standing at the front door with her walker anxiously waiting for us to come inside. My partner and I go into the basement and you can tell that no one had been down there for a while because as I walked I kept hitting cobwebs that were dangling from the ceiling. Anyway, everything appeared to be in order, and eventually I found the light switch further into the basement and turned it off. We shut the basement door behind us and clear the main floor too, since she was so adamant that she heard rustling and coughing in the basement. The basement was relatively empty, and I assure you no one was down there. As we are about to leave she asks if we turned the light off. I said yes, and opened the door to show her, but the light was back on when I did. I kept my composure and asked her if I could turn the lights on/off from upstairs as well. Negative. My partner and I exchanged looks and I went back down to turn the lights off again, and GTFO. We met up after the call and dug a little bit into the history of the house, and it turned out that a year ago on that day we attended to help paramedics because her husband had fallen down those stairs. Not sure if he made it or not, but nope. I worked as a forensic nurse in a lockup unit in the hospital once with state and county inmates. Had one older/demented lady who swore she was being haunted/abused by a demon she would call Tiberius. So many crazy things happened whenever she was there, like we'd go into the room, do normal care, leave, and seconds later she'd start screaming bloody murder, and we'd run into the room to find her looking like she'd been in a fight with a boxing champ, bloody lip, black eye, markings all over her body. No one ever saw her doing this stuff to herself. Things would get moved around the room by themselves, like at one point she was in protective restraints because the doc thought she was hurting herself. There was no way she could have moved or done anything to herself while in these restraints, but new marks would always appear or her tray/cart would be across the room. The room was secure, so there was no way someone else was doing this. You'd ask her questions and she'd just say it was Tiberius. After she was discharged, we always had trouble with that room. If there was going to be a rapid response or code, it happened in that room. One of the guards reporting that lights were going on and off in a room. It was that one. I am a CNA in a local hospital. One of my patients just had a quad bypass, open heart surgery, and I went in to check her vitals. The room was dim and the hall was quiet. I'm looking at her, and in the corner of my eye I see something drop from the ceiling out of nowhere. It makes a big clunk sound and I turn to see what it could be. There's nothing there. At that moment my patient looks up at me and say, "My dad's here." Passes back out. I finish my job and leave. When I would go to that floor again as a floater, I would hate to go into that room. When I was 19 to 21, I was employed as a security enforcement officer through a local private investigator firm. I know I wasn't technically the lay you're asking for, but I've always wanted some place to share this story. I spent a 12P/12A shift at an upscale theater, and then my boss called me and told me I was assigned to a YMCA construction site that everyone kept calling out from. The sooner I could come in the better, he said. So after working 12 hours at the theater, I spent another 3P/8M at that site. By the time I arrived home, it was around 9:30 and I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. But I received a phone call. It was my brother. His birthday was that day, and I had completely forgotten about it. My whole family and I went shopping around and then ate at a restaurant about 45 minutes from my house. At around 1 p, I told them I had to leave because I just couldn't keep my eyes open. As I was driving home, no amount of music or driving with the windows down would keep my eyes open. I started drifting into the opposite lane of traffic. I decided it was best if I pull over. I looked around, and there was an ice cream shop. So I stopped in. It was a weird place for it to be, because the highway I was driving on was a smaller country highway and it was on the outskirts of town. So an odd place to put a shop that would seem to rely on foot traffic. There was a woman out front asking if I had stopped for ice cream. I didn't want to be a dick and just tell her I wanted a nap, so I said yes. I went inside and it was rather junky. It looked like they bought furniture from old barbecue restaurants and threw it at random into the building. The same woman was now behind the counter. I said I wanted 2 scoops of chocolate on a cone and pulled out my bank's debit card. "We don't take cards here," she said. She handed me the ice cream cone. I dug around in my pockets and went back to my truck for change. I never keep anything but a debit card on me, but I found about 50 cents and I gave it to her. She said the price was $1.80, but that'll do. I didn't know what else to do, because I was half asleep and she had given me the ice cream cone already, despite the fact I was attempting to pay with a debit card as she was making it. I said thanks and walked outside at stand and eat it. I'm a pig when I eat, so by the time I made it to my truck, I had some already on my face and uniform. Before I could make it to my truck, the woman walks outside to talk to me. "You look troubled," she said. "But whatever you're going through, you'll be fine." I get in my truck and leave this, I'm now assuming, batshit crazy ice cream vendor. I get home and fall asleep. The next day I'm getting my uniform ready when I see chocolate ice cream on my uniform shirt. The ice cream shop wasn't far away from my house, so I felt I should go pay her what I owed. I pulled up to the building, but it was locked. Their building was empty and there was a sheet of dust caked over the doors like no one has touched them in years. Former inmate in a small county jail in Oregon. At about 2 a.m. one night, the radio in the pod started squealing really loud, all static screeching. One of the COs came in and turned it down, changed the station, walked back out. Next day when I was working in the kitchen, one of the nicer COs came in and was talking to us about what happened the night before. Apparently on the video of the pod, you can see something of a shadow come out of one of the cells and move to the radio. About a minute later, there was a flash in front of the radio before it got loud. Unfortunately, I ended up back in jail and got placed in the cell the CO said the shadow had came out from. Something about that cell creeped me out. It almost sucked the thoughts right from you. I was an EMT for a while. We got a call about someone who was riding their bike at a breakneck speed when they hit a car head first without a helmet. We went over immediately. Despite the fact that it was broad daylight and we were in the middle of suburbia on a Saturday, nobody even came to check on this poor guy. Seriously, the streets were empty. Usually a massive crowd gathers around violent accidents like this. So his skull was pretty much smashed in and he was unresponsive. It was the worst head injury I'd ever seen. We assessed that he had a major skull fracture, a concussion, and he was bleeding profusely. He was also missing teeth and had a minor road rash, but fortunately he wasn't missing much skin. To give you an idea of how bad it was, this was the kind of injury that most people don't survive. If you did survive, you'd basically be a crippled vegetable. Normally we would have moved him off the road, but when someone has a head/neck injury, that isn't very safe. My partner, who was also training me as I was still kinda new, went to check his pulse while I began to unload our gear. He crouched down, felt for a pulse for a while, and then stood up and opened his mouth to say something. Suddenly, the guy fucking jumped up. He didn't use his arms to pick himself up, he just fucking jumped to his feet. It startled the two of us. He looked at us, smiled, and attempted to grab his bike. We tried to stop him, but we didn't exactly want to wrestle him to the ground given his condition. He gets away from us and bolts into the woods without his bike. My partner was in even more disbelief than I was. He just stared at where the man had run off, mouth agape. Then he turned to me and muttered he had no fucking pulse, man. I asked him if he was sure and he swore up and down that the biker was clinically dead. We contacted the authorities for assistance and they sent a search and rescue team into the forest. I don't know if he was found or not, because we normally don't get much information about patients after they go to the professionals. Keep in mind that this was the Pine Barrens, so they had a lot of ground to cover. My best guess is that he went to a loved one's house out of confusion. What I found odd about that is, head injuries bleed like fucking hell, so you'd think the guy would leave a long red trail of blood for the cops to follow. My partner and I received a 911 call from an old woman having a dispute with someone. We get to the house and she says she alone. We say, who are you having a dispute with? She says, oh, just this spirit in one of my rooms. Immediately me and partner look at each other and give the old she's elderly, it's probably dementia or something along those lines. As we're talking to her, she's explaining how sometimes a bad spirit comes around. She states that he's in the back room and, of course, the lights don't work. We try to tell her that spirits probably aren't in her house and we have to get to another 911 call. She insists we check it out. So we do. Now, the house, the way she was speaking about spirits, made me believe something was there. When we got the room and she opened the door, seeing a ghost wouldn't have shocked me. She did say that it's usually in the corner up on the ceiling. Well, that corner was dark and had the freakiest shadow that legitimately was terrifying. My partner and I shine our flashlights on the whole room and thankfully, nothing was there. We told the lady, nope, you're good, nothing going on here. I said to her, if you feel there's a spirit there, the NYPD cannot help you, go to a local church religious institution of your choosing and best of luck. We got the fuck out of there. Before my dad became a state police officer, he did some security work at a big factory. He's not normally a superstitious person, so when he told me this story with such a weird seriousness to it, it kind of scared the shit out of me. He's always said I don't mess with that stuff regarding supernatural things, but anyway. This story is in the early 80s. With working at the factory, he always had the night shift. It was just him. And the big ass factory. He had his own little room where he could watch TV, listen to the radio and do whatever. But the rest of the factory, for the most part besides the exits, was dark. His job was to actually patrol the factory every hour. He'd get up, grab his flashlight and just stroll around the place going down row by row, peeking his head out left to right. One night he set out to do his usual run, with flashlight in hand. But he could see that something was unusual to his eye when he walked out into the dark. You know that sensation you get when your eyes adjust to the room and you can just start to make out certain objects but nothing full or whole. There was something darker in the main hall or row. And it was moving. He paused for a minute and as his eyes fully adjusted, there seemed to be nothing. He took a second to swipe the factory with his light. And then decided that he was just seeing things. He went down into the main row and started his run. Everything was normal, nothing out of the ordinary. Although he was still a bit on edge, seeing as the factory without a big moving shadow was creepy enough. When the rows of the factory ended, there was a big open area at the end. This was the entrance to the factory. Normally there would be a light at the front door, but tonight it had dimmed lower. He thought that was weird and really began to sweat, So instead of investigating any further, he turned from the exit and went to go back into the main row and get back up to his room. That's when in the corner of his eye on the right side he could see what he described as a black cloaked figure. His light hit it and he saw it. Tall and distinctly human-like. But he didn't stop. He just went right back to his room, locked the door and stayed in there until it was light out. He left the factory and called the owner to tell him he wouldn't be returning to the job. I don't blame him. Leo here. Okay, so I was supervising on evening shift in a small town in rural Australia. We have a large river that snakes its way past the town and runs close to some of the residential areas. It's a kilometer wide in some parts, has steep banks and thick bush in the bed when it's dry. One of my crews were tied up with something, and the other was attending two brothers threatening suicide after having a fight at a residence near the bank of the river. I heard the job and attended to give my crew a hand. Upon arrival, we found one brother who was self-harming and on drugs. We restrained him to prevent him from harming himself. He was telling us he wanted to kill himself and was taken to hospital via ambulance for mental health. As we had made the apprehension, my crew had to accompany the ambulance for everyone's safety. My crew leaves and then am told by the family that the other brother had run off down the river drive bank threatening to hang himself. The family said he was drunk but didn't have anything to actually hang himself with. I was concerned and attended the river bank near where they thought he went down the river steep bank. Both crews were busy and I was by myself, at night, and it started raining lightly. I parked my unit at the top of the bank with the lights pointed onto the bush, hoping that if he saw my lights he'd come towards me. I got out my torch and made my way down the bank. I found a small clearing and a small distance away was thick bush. I heard something moving in the bush. It sounded like something taking deliberate steps in the bush. I yelled out thinking it was the guy I was after. I told him I was here to help and pleaded with him to come out. No response, and when I was talking, whatever it was stopped moving. I kept talking, attempting to make contact as my instincts told me someone was in the thick bush in front of me. No response. My torch couldn't penetrate the bush, but I could hear distinct footfalls. I stopped making any noise, turned off my light and stood still listening. I hear movement coming towards me in the bush. I remained still and listened. It came closer. Without thinking, my hand went down to my gun and I was ready to draw. I turned on my light and walked forward and hear whatever it was move away from me. I backed off, turned off my light and remained silent. It started coming closer to me, probing my position. I repeated the exercise once more and once more it backed off and came back at a different angle. By this stage I was on high alert. Something told me GTFO. I got this heavy eerie feeling. Any animal that was down there would have run off upon my approach. No animal I know approaches/probes a human's position at night like that. Once I got the overwhelming feeling to leave, I backed off, with my hand on my gun, and I didn't turn my back until I had to climb up the bank. Once at the top and back with my car I felt a lot better, but I could still hear something moving in the bush. I stayed there for a while as I was curious. I left and conducted inquiries, finding the missing brother on the other side of town fast asleep and fine. To this day I don't know what I ran into down in the riverbed that night. Patrol officer here. This is not my story but my partner's, and all three officers on scene verified this story too. So my partner responds to a priority breaking and entering call. A house sitter/dog sitter calls and says that he can hear loud banging and footsteps coming from downstairs, the ground floor, and he should be the only one home. The house sitter and the dog are both upstairs, dog is in a cage. So officers respond priority, including a K9 officer. Police release K9 into the house first to clear the house. K9 comes out empty-handed. 3 officers then go inside the house and clear it themselves. Again, nothing and nobody inside. Officers then step out front with the house sitter that called 911. As they're telling him the house is empty, they see the curtains of the bedroom window on the second floor open. They're heavy curtains and they parted from the center, so they claim it couldn't really be possible from air vents kicking on or anything like that. And all 3 officers and the house sitter all see it. Then the guy asks police to come back inside with him because he's going to take the dog to a different home for the night and he needs to get the dog out of the cage. The police refuse to go back inside with him, not the best example of public service. This is unexplained, and probably just coincidence, but I still never mention it to my coworkers. I spent some time as a homicide investigator. We would respond to all apparent suicides and investigate them just to make sure it wasn't a homicide. Usually we determined a motive for suicide and found a note or other indicator that the person killed themselves. One guy just taped a note to his chest that said "Happy Now," and made sure his wife found him after he hanged himself. But occasionally you get a case where all forensic evidence indicates that the person killed themselves, but there's no note and no discernible reason why this person would be suicidal. These are people in good health with decent careers and a seemingly happy family life. But who knows what's really going on with someone? Here's the part that freaks me out. I've worked maybe 10 suicides like this. The last 3 before I left homicide all had the same thing at the scene. These was a little decorative wicker lighthouse at each location. It was the same lighthouse, same design and painted white and blue. It stuck out to me the first time because it was by the bed where the body was, but 2 weeks later I saw the same damn lighthouse on another suicide and even pointed out the coincidence to a patrol officer. A few months later I go on another suicide and I see that same wicker lighthouse. That's when it clicks that it's always been unexplained suicides. I go back and look at crime scene photos from every suicide I've worked. In 2 of them I see what could be the wicker lighthouse, but the angle is off and there's too much junk around to say for sure. I don't know. I thought it was creepy as hell, but I transferred a couple of months later and I let it go. At the time I was a 3rd shift caregiver in assisted living. We have pagers that go off if a resident pushes their call button asking us to help go to the bathroom, or if they fall, etc. We get a page about 12 a.m. to a resident's room, a woman who was one of my favorite people in the building at the time, who is wheelchair bound and she needs to use the restroom. Now she must have had pneumonia or something respiratory going on that wasn't diagnosed because the daughter never took her to get checked out and the resident refused to go to a doctor, but you could hear her troubled breathing from down the hall. When we got to the room, besides the fact that she had loud raspy breathing, she acted as if nothing was wrong. She was joking around and teasing my coworker and I as usual, but we could tell something was a little off by the way she was acting. We do 2-hour checks on the resident, so by this time it was about 2 a.m. We check one side of the building and make our way to the hallway with the woman, but as we turn the corner I stop. My coworker asks what's wrong, I tell her it's quiet and she realizes what I mean. The woman had passed. We made all the calls that we were to make per protocol and they have her body moved out of the room by about 5-ish, and the last thing we have to do before shift change is unlock the front doors at about 5:45 a.m. I make my way to the double glass push doors to unlock them and open and close the door to make sure they were really unlocked. As the glass doors are closing I see in the reflection of the glass is the woman who had just passed away sitting in the chair behind me. I spin around to find an empty chair. I was an electrician in the Navy serving on the Iwo Jima LHD-7. LHDs are roughly half the size of an aircraft carrier, so as you can imagine, they are quite large. Several friends supposedly had heard voices in out-of-the-way engineering spaces. The previous Iwo Jima had a steam leak that killed 10 engineers, and I had been in several creepy spaces on the ship, but other than a general feeling of unease, nothing weird happened to me. That is until one night, a couple months before I got out of the Navy. We were doing cleaning on the electrical switchboards. This required killing power to the majority of the ship. We did this in the middle of the night after working hours, and the only people on board were a handful of duty section personnel and about 30 of us electricians. In the Navy, when securing power to equipment, you hang red danger tags on breakers and fuses so that way people know not to turn on said power source because they may cause injury or death to someone. A friend and I went to hang several danger tags in a pump room. The main power had already been shut off, so the area of the ship we were in was pitch black except for our flashlights. To enter this pump room, we had to open a hatch in the hangar bay, climb down a steep vertical ladder, and then go down another short vertical ladder. At this point, we are below the water line. We hang the danger tags in the upper part of the pump room, then head down the stairs to the lower section with my friend in the lead. Halfway way down the stairs, I hear what sounds like a woman scream. I stop. My friend stops. Keep in mind there are very few people on board the ship at this time, and we were the only ones in this part of the ship. He turns to me and asks if I just heard a woman scream. I say, I didn't, and neither did you. We hang the last tags as quickly as possible, and exit the pump room. We're greeted by our chief in the hangar bay, and ask her if she had heard a scream. She hadn't, and she told us she had been standing outside the hatch since shortly after we had entered. Asked the women in our division if any of them had screamed that night. No one had. And I never went into that pump room again. When I first joined the police, during our first 2 days of training school we had a lecture from this old sweat, British police slang for an officer who has been in the force for a long time, who'd been in the job for about 20 years. He told us of his weirdest experience of policing. He said he'd been out on patrol in a car, when they got an abandoned call to a house. He got there and it was a big house sort of isolated, and they knocked on the door and no one answered. He went to open the door and it was unlocked, and he walked in. The house was empty. No people, no furniture, no possessions. Completely vacant. He looked around and found no one there, but then looked upstairs and thought he saw someone move. He went upstairs. It was a really big house with a long hall upstairs. When he got up there, he saw someone go into the bedroom right at the end of the hall. He followed the person there, calling out as he went. Again, all the other rooms were completely empty of even furniture. When he got to the room he saw the person go in, he found it completely empty. No one was in it, and nothing was there apart from a big long mirror. He walked into the room and looked into the mirror. He told us he saw something in the mirror that he said has haunted him for the rest of his life. He wouldn't tell us what he saw, and said he'd tell no one ever, but that it terrified him. He turned around and left the room to leave. As he walked down the hallway he saw that all the rooms were now filled with furniture. No one was there still, but the house no longer looked abandoned. He said he left the house that day never knowing what had happened, or who had called police, but absolutely 100% sure of what he'd seen. He was completely serious, and it was obvious that he really believed that was what he'd seen, and it gave me chills down my spine when he was telling us. I've never forgotten it. I used to work overnight in a hospital and creepy things happened all time. Call lights going off in unoccupied rooms, footsteps behind me in long dark halls, the smell of weird perfumes when no one is around. And those are just the little things. One night I heard my coworker call for me. I came around the corner to the nurse's station and she's MIA. I assumed she had to run something to a room. I go about my rounds, and when I finally run into her, ask her what she needed. She said she didn't need anything, that she'd been on break and never said my name or called out to me. I argued for a few minutes until I realized she had no reason to lie. But I heard it plain as day. Still creeps me out when I think about it. Another place you want to avoid at night is the morgue. Not a cop or law enforcer, but I worked at a funeral home all throughout college. I don't usually believe in the paranormal, but there were a couple times I questioned it. There is this one time that stands out more than any other experience. Usually when I was working, it was to work after normal funeral home hours at a viewing/rosary. This usually meant I was there until dark by myself. Our funeral home was also an old house that always gave me a creepy vibe. My routine for closing was to turn off all the lights, make sure the crematory was off/cleaned with no one in there, close any open caskets, transfer the phones, and lock the door. There was this one time I was in a viewing room turning off all the lights. It was a mid-40s man in one of our viewing rooms. Now normally an embalmed body has their eyelids shut. Our funeral home used what amounts to sticky contacts that would hold the eyes shut. As I was turning off the last light, out of the corner of my eye I saw the light reflecting off of an eyeball. This is nearly impossible and made all the hair stand up on my neck. I turned around and I swear on my parents' grave it looked like that man was looking right at me. He had the glassy eyes of a dead person and his mouth was still sewn with a slight smile. His head was turned slightly and his eyes were wide open. Instead of being the good funeral home employee and checking it out, I sprinted out of there. I immediately called my boss and told her what I saw. She said to not worry about closing the casket but to transfer the phones and go. She didn't believe a word I said. Going back in was tough. As I was in the front office, I was holding the phone shaking and continually checking around the corner for anything. I was so scared I called my roommate while I finished transferring. Didn't open the next day. They checked the body and nothing was off. His eyes were shut and his neck wasn't rotated. My boss made fun of me for a good couple of months after that. I can't explain what I saw, but it could have been due to tiredness or my brain playing tricks in the dark. Either way, I will never forget that experience. A story from Russia. The father of my girlfriend was a voluntary cop. It's like your American deputy, but with less authority. Those guys handle small stuff like walking on public lawns or a drunkard singing in the street. It was evening. They got a report that people are having an illegal gathering in the city park. He went there to check, and found only two rather big families celebrating a wedding. He wished them good luck and went back, but decided to cut short route through the old cemetery. The cemetery is of times of World War II, and no new graves were made since then. One old man kept half an eye over it for a small salary, and it was a rather tranquil old place. It was dark already, so our hero walked fast along the main road, when he saw the gravekeeper. Old man was fixing a fence that was damaged by a fallen branch. Rather far from him there was his cart, full of gardening tools. Our hero decided to pull a prank on the gravekeeper. He sneaked to the cart, took one of the litter bags, cut 2 holes in it for eyes, with pocket knife, and put it over his head and torso. Then he sneaked up to the gravekeeper, turned on a lighter under the bag, so that light shined from the eyes, and started wailing. The gravekeeper turned around slowly, stared at him for a minute, turned away and continued his work. Our hero was so confused by the lack of effect. He started to feel bad for his childish behavior. He pulled off the bag, mumbled "sorry man," and walked fast towards the exit. At the very gates of cemetery, he heard running footsteps behind him. It was the gravekeeper, who ran up to him, poked him painfully with a spade and shouted, "How many times do I tell you, people, wander around, if you need, but don't leave the territory." I was an intern for my city's SUV unit. Because I didn't have my own car, my dad would drop me off on his way to work, and so I was normally in the building before the detectives arrived. One morning I wasn't the first one there. The detective that had been assigned first call was there. So I was starting up the coffee when I heard screaming and banging from the interview room. I peeked through the one-way window and I saw a middle-aged guy smashing the chair against the wall while screaming. I went and told the detective what the guy was doing, and he told me the guy had been doing that on and off since he had been brought in. The detective told me the guy had no criminal record and no history of mental health problems, but early that morning the guy had broken into his sister's home, stabbed her, choked her, raped her, tied a rope around her neck and then threw her out a window. The guy wouldn't talk, he just kept screaming and breaking things. He wasn't even a suspect until his sister regained consciousness and identified him. Last I heard, she was alive but is paralyzed from the neck down. He committed suicide in jail. No one knew why he did it. Didn't happen to me, but I responded and was there shortly thereafter. A coworker responds for a building check located at the city pool. Middle of summer, warm night, it was sometime around 1 a.m. The pool is a simple block building on the edge of town, surrounded by a large empty field on one side, a parking lot, playground and trees on the other. Coworker keys up radio and says __ pool, I got one running toward the field, unknown male, blue jeans, gray shirt. We all on shift go quickly, of course. We find our coworker not far from where the foot pursuit began. He's literally looking at the ground, into the sky, everywhere in that empty field. Retracing his steps, mumbling incoherently. We ask where the suspect was last seen, and he just keeps repeating, we turned the corner of the building and he disappeared. Gone. Now, with the layout of the grounds, if you turn the corner of the building you have the option of running toward the large empty field, or scaling the 10 fence into the pool area. That's it. Nowhere else to go and you cannot climb the building. We check the pool and surrounding grounds, nothing. Coworker swears he was on the guy's heels, guy disappeared for a split second turning the corner, coworker clears the building corner and suspect has disappeared. Judging by the coworker's statement and absolute astonishment/fear in his eyes, he's seen something not of this world. Maybe he was chasing some Usain Bolt of trespassers, I dunno. To this day he says he chased an alien. Case still unsolved. Here's an odd one that I still have trouble believing today, and you physically had to be there to believe this. I was 19 and a volunteer EMT. We got a 911 dispatch call to a house that's been abandoned for well over 15 years. Police, fire and EMS shows up. Police sweep the house and say it's clear. So EMS, myself and Captain go in, we go upstairs to the top floor of this farm out and it's extremely cold. The temperature outside had to be 80 F. Oddly enough, the window's wide open. So I slam it shut. This window took some effort being as old as it was to close, and looking out at the fire truck and ambulance in clear view in the driveway. He asked me what the noise was, so I told him I just shut the window that was open. We checked crawl spaces, closets, basement which also had an eerie feeling of death in. There were shackles on the pillar, I guess it was for farm animals when being butchered. At least that's what a firefighter told us. We then proceed outside and my captain says, I thought you closed that window? Looking up at it. I said I did. Who opened it? So I go back inside expecting someone to still be in there and it was empty. So I simply closed the window once more, checked the window too to see if it's spring loaded and maybe I didn't close it properly. Nope, typical sliding window. So shut once again I went downstairs and back out. The window still shut. I looked up and saw a man in a plaid shirt put his hand to the window and once I focused, he was gone. But easily decipherable that it was a white male in late 50s with short black hair. So I thought nothing of it. It bothered me when I got bored and daydreamed. I began to do a little research on the property about who owns it and if anyone lived there. To my surprise, a friend of mine said his uncle lived there his whole life on the farm. He was the last one to pass away in the home. The uncle lived with his parents, which they passed years prior, also in home. So I asked my friend if he was late 50s, short black hair and died upstairs. His face dropped and he said yes. He passed away from diabetes. He did not take his insulin and was found dead by his brother a few days later. After that, I look into that window every day driving by saying a prayer on my way to work. I am a detective for a sheriff's office in Tennessee. One night, I was called to the scene of a death. The victim had died of a gunshot wound to the head. Once there, I located the victim laying the floor of an unfinished basement. The victim's spouse was an employee of our sheriff's office, so I ended up asking for the State Bureau of Investigation to work the investigation, to eliminate any kind of conflict of interest. I was told that their response was going to be over 4 hours due to them working a homicide across the state, and it would take a few hours to close up what they were doing and travel to my location. Another detective and myself agreed to wait at the crime scene till they arrived. Since I was already on scene, I agreed to take the first 2 hours to provide scene security. I sent our deputies back in service to handle calls, leaving me at the scene by myself. I began my watch by sitting in a chair next to an exit door in the basement, leaving the body in eyesight approximately 50 feet away. After 45 minutes, I was surfing the web on my phone when I heard a loud hissing sound followed by what sounded like an open hand smack to a flat surface. The sounds came from where the victim was lying. The house had been cleared and locked down prior to me sending deputies back in service. The only way in or out was the door at which I was sitting. After this, I went outside and pulled my car up to the door and sat there with the engine running. I mentioned the occurrence to the medical examiner and she laughed, saying that she hears all kinds of weird noises coming from bodies. I'm pretty sure the hissing sound was gas escaping the body, but the loud smack I cannot explain. So this is not me, this is my best friend's story, whom is a cop and patrol officer. So anyhow, in my hometown there is an old hospital that's long since been retired since they built a new one nearly a decade ago. Well, to keep people out of it, they have cameras set up at the entrances and a few motion sensors in the hallways. No one is supposed to be in this place. No one. The building is owned by the city and they currently aren't even using it for storage. They just keep the place in decent conditions in case they ever need to use it again. Apparently, according to my cop friend, almost weekly, at least once, occasionally twice a week. The cameras will pick up movement and follow something into the door, and then the motion sensors will go off in a pattern like someone is walking the halls and checking rooms. My friend gets set in to clear it one night. He's won the phone with the alarm company and they sent him to the second floor of this retired hospital to clear this building that's very creepy. And the alarm company is telling him the alarms on the floor he is on are going off, and he dead serious says, "Listen, I'm on the second floor currently and there isn't anyone here, and a door halfway down the hallway just opened and closed. Oh fuck, the next one down just did it too. Fuck this shit, I'm out. Whatever the fuck is here can stay here. My partner is in the car. I'm noping out of this place." Cop for 15 years in a gang-infested war zone. It was a late graveyard night. Get a call that an old lady is saying she sees someone in her backyard. The dispatcher tells me this is like the 8th time this week she's called and we never found anything. So I go thinking this is just another crazy lady who calls and is lonely. My beat partner and I go in. She's saying he's still in the backyard somewhere. Sure lady. I walk out the slider and start checking the very nice and full backyard. It has several Japanese maples, bushes and a small pond. The ground is flat rock. It's a very nice backyard. Then as I'm walking around shining my light to make this lady happy so we can go to the next call, I suddenly feel weird. Like fear. I got that feeling in known dangerous situations but now had it for no reason. I shine my light on the top of the fence and there is a guy in a black hoodie and black sweats with hood over his head. His head is down and I can't see his face. He's up on the top of the fence and he's squatting perched like a bird. He is just sitting there with no fear or anything while 2 cops start searching the yard. I'm shocked. Nobody acts like that, they run or surrender immediately. Nobody just chills like that. So before I can say anything, he then does a fucking backflip off the fence into the yard behind him. I hop on the fence and he is running through the yard super fast. Oddly fast. Call the chopper, several units, and we search the whole block, nothing. The lady would call in all the time and guys would never find anything. She even called once saying he was in the yard in a clown suit playing cards. Yay, fucking creepy. Went on for months until she stopped calling. Who knows what the hell happened? Another story. Was in the gang unit at this time, so I had a car partner. He's driving. We are driving down the road late at like 3 a.m. Up ahead we see a car pulled over. The people are out, a guy and gal about 30s. They are staring ahead into the sky. This, mind you, is down the outskirts of the town country road. So we look up to where they are looking and see about 6 bright lights in the sky in a rectangle formation. They were going up and down side to side in perfect formation. My partner says those have got to be drones. We get out and look at the people, puzzled as well. They are like, do you see this? We stare at them for about 10 seconds, then some of the lights shut off as the others still are moving around perfectly. I shine my light at them and they immediately disappear. It was instant. Nobody is that fast, so we get back in the car and start driving more down the road to see what's up. I look over and in the pitch black sky to our side there is a black craft shaped like a pear. It was matched almost perfectly with the night sky and hard to see. We partially illuminated it as we passed it with our headlights. I saw it, my partner didn't. I told him to stop and look. We stopped, got out, the craft was gone. He thought I was crazy. I saw what I saw. We looked around a bit and saw nothing else. I fly drones, I know them well, even personally trained the department on drone capabilities for police. We now have a program. Those were not drones. Way too bright and no sound. This was about 5 years ago, so drone tech was not as good yet. Also those field they were above was a dairy. Nobody we saw anywhere near. Few years later I was outside my house with my 3-year-old daughter. Every night before bed we would look at the stars. It was a routine. So she asked me what that star is as she points out one that is very bright. I look at it and it's near the horizon and it's extremely bright and out of place. As we stare at it, it accelerates to a super speed and disappears over horizon. My daughter and I were both speechless. I without a doubt believe there is alien life out there and we have been visited.